All right, let's get started. I know that like a bunch of people like want to like know about my interaction with Curtis Yarvin and at at Harvard on Monday evening. What I'll say about that is him and I had a 40-minute back and forth discussion. Uh, we Curtis challenged me to a public discussion slash debate, told him that I would do it. So I have like reached out through an intermediary to try and see if that can be arranged. Um, I would say, so we're gonna see if we can make that happen. So Mike Brockins will have a proper debate. But I'll have more to say about our interaction later. Um, I want to talk about something else though today. Something I haven't really talked about much. Uh, I have talked about it like at sort of the fringes, maybe like a little bit like indirectly in some of my pieces, but it needs to be said. I read a piece today by Yasha Monk. Um, I don't know if people are familiar with him. Um, he's been like he's been like public intellectual, has been really concerned with identity politics as a affliction of the left. And I've read his book, The Identity Trap. Um, it's worth reading, right? I actually think he does a pretty good job at the intellectual history behind a lot of the sort of like thinking there. Um, and I wanted to like kind of like talk about this whole like woke thing and like what I think about it. Um, um, I just want to like I do like I do want to like say because like I don't think anyone would really at this point accuse me of being on the right. Um, I think I'm pretty like you know I think I'm like I'm politically like like I believe in um I believe in the idea of like political centrism as like a moral position, like actually I do think that in a stable liberal democracy, like I think that there should be compromise at the center. Like you need to there needs to be some like you need to have a large like uh you have to have a large polity, right? Like that's willing to sort of like exist within difference in a stable democracy. So I think that this whole concept of like centrism is like misunderstood because like for example like I think like at this point, right? I think you can be like a centrist and support universal health care, for example. I don't think that that's like actually that radical. Someone would say that's radical because they're like, well, you have like Bernie Sanders like over here, and you have like you know, the Republicans over here, and they like, and this idea that like universal health care is like a far left position, and like market based health care is a far right position. It's like actually like really not that simple actually. Like it's like there's, I mean Mitt Romney kind of like brought like Romney care to like Massachusetts, right? It's right wingers can sometimes like support welfare programs. Bush did Medicare Part D, right? Prescription medications for seniors in his first term. Um So I don't think centrism has like anything to do with this like idea of like plotting policy positions on this left-right spectrum. I think that's like an incoherent view. Um, when I say I'm a political centrist, I don't mean I'm splitting the difference between the left and the right. Um, what I'm doing is like I'm like actually like trying to think about what what set of policies like, results in the greatest amount of democratic legitimacy. And some of those policies might be like, I mean, some of Bernie Sanders, I mean, like the idea of like, universal healthcare is like pretty popular, right? Like, I mean, so like, like if you, or even, um, if you look at, support for, higher taxes on the rich even, right? Like if you look at Gallup and Q polling on this, right? You get like 67, 70% of Americans that say like rich could pay more, and like sometimes like 30, 40% of Republicans, right? So um is higher taxes on the rich a far left perspective? Does that mean that like 60 to 70% of Americans are on the far left? I don't think so. Um, so you could like actually like argue with a straight face that that's actually a centrist position, like just based on the fact that there's like a large political, very large cross section of Americans, like a super majority of Americans that are like comfortable with that stance. So I think this idea that centrism is about splitting the difference between like what the Republicans say and the Democrats say is like it's weird. It's weird. I mean, the political philosopher and political, I'm not really a political scientist, but like, I'm thinking about it like through a political science lens. I think it's just an incoherent thing. And I know that everyone intuitively thinks of it like that, and it's very frustrating. I don't think of it like that. Like when I say centrism, I'm like actually like kind of saying something that's like very nuanced. Um, it doesn't, it doesn't mean like what people think it means. And I actually think there is like a very large center in American politics. Like when you look at it on a policy by policy basis, right? I think you can get 60 to 70% of Americans to agree on like, immigration policy, tax policy, immigration policy. It's actually kind of frustrating. What you find is that a lot of these issues, these polarized issues, are the result of like very, very committed ideological, factions on both sides of the aisle that create sort of coalitional issues, and they're able to sort of like use that as like leverage to have these sort of like, you know radical positions sort of like force their way into the political mainstream. It's actually a real failing of our two party system that this happens. So I mean, I would sort of like I don't think that being a centrist means you're wishy-washy, right? Um I think you can be a centrist and believe that like, you have to do bold things. You can be a centrist and believe we need like, I don't think like supporting Medicare for all makes you far leftist. Like I think you can support Medicare for all, and you can support that in addition to free trade and like, generally like smart regulation and pro-growth regulation. And you can support, that in addition with like, I don't know, like some like, I mean, a lot of like, like in the sort of political philosophy world, like a lot of people who call themselves centrists support things like universal basic income and stuff. So I do think this concept of centrism, like when you're talking about it like philosophically, it just means something like different than how Americans use it in regular discourse, which is this like weird sort of intuitive belief that it's about like cutting Democratic and Republican policies in half and sticking them together. I don't know what that means. Anyways, so the back to like I think the whole conversation about um uh like the woke thing, right? Yeah, so I read Yasha's like piece today. Like the thing that like really like stood out for me, right, is and I say this as like someone who has sort of like agreed with a lot of his observations about the illiberal tendencies in sort of the thinking and the groups that he's uh talking about. But this sense that like, this sort of like recession of like, of what, my philosopher friend Vlad Vexler calls hyper identity politics. I think and it is in recession, right? Like you're seeing companies like shut down DEI programs, like on, some of them, feeling threatened by the administration, but some of them just because they wanted to. And I actually think a lot of that was sort of starting to happen even before the election. And so the question is this sort of quote unquote like woke retreat? Like, is it, like, what is it? Like, what's going on there? Is this a function of, um, is it a corrective? Is this pure intimidation from the Trump administration? Like, what's going on with this? Like, what's going on with this social phenomenon that the right calls woke, and political philosophers sometimes call hyper identity politics, and like, left identitarianism, whatever it is. I mean, there is a real thread, in leftist thought, and and it does need to be said, right, that like I'm a philosophical liberal. Um, I write about this a lot. I've written a lot about what that means over the course of like many essays. Um, that doesn't like that doesn't mean that like I'm a liberal necessarily in the way that like I think a lot of like Americans understand it. I don't consider myself a libertarian. In fact, I'm very harsh of libertarianism, as some of you have also seen. So, like, what does that mean? I'm a liberal. Um, well, it doesn't. It's a set of like ethical commitments. Ultimately, it's not a set of policies. In fact, my liberalism is sort of upstream of my belief in democracy and self-government. So I think of my liberalism as, actually kind of at the kind of the core of who I am, which means that like I generally I have not just like liberal values as it pertains to sort of my political preferences, but I have liberal values in my personal life, like with you right now, how I think about other human beings, like how I value them, how I think that, um, you know, we should, how I think that people should be treated, how community should be formed, how we should think about community, how we should think about like ourselves as individuals in that community and our relationship with the community. Um, I have like I have like pretty like developed views about all of this as it pertains to liberal values, and I could talk about that, all these things, all these liberal values, without talking about like immigration policy or healthcare. Um, and I think that this is like kind of a sometimes a distinction which is misunderstood, right? In fact, I think a lot of someone who's like a sort of dyed in the wolf, like Marxian, like full on socialist, probably like might even like perceive me as a right winger, right? And a lot of Marxists do think liberalism is a right wing ideology. They do. I mean, some people think that. I don't. I don't. I think that's silly. Um, but obviously, obviously the American right doesn't think liberalism is a right wing ideology. Certainly not like the reactionaries who are sort of pushing for a post liberal world. So yeah, like we should talk about, right, like what like liberal kind of ethical commitments are. Sorry, I kicked the phone stand. Um, fundamentally, I think like the main thing that I, as a liberal, right, am committed to is sort of this idea of, I mean, I can describe it as like human dignity, right? The idea that like all of us have sort of an intrinsic worth that is the same regardless of who you are, right? As like a general starting position. And I, as a liberal, also understand that freedom doesn't come from just the absence of constraints. It comes from the presence of justice and law and order, right? And so, um, and that like various other things should be true, that there should be law and order in a liberal in a liberal ethic, and that to the extent that we establish rules, the you know the execution or the enforcement of those rules should be fair and equitable. That somebody similarly situated should get the same sort of general experience as somebody else. Um, so someone similarly situated, that is. Said that in a weird way. Um, my thoughts just come out sometimes like this. I'm talking off the cuff. So, I mean, like that, like to me, like this is that's a kind of, we're kind of getting really at the core of like what liberalism is. Um, and none of that like really says anything about like whether we should have public schools or like whether we should how many immigrants we should let in, like who we should give green cards to, how hard it is to get citizenship. Um, Liberals can have arguments about all of those things, right? And a lot of them are contingent on a lot of factors about like what is true about the context in which we live, right? Um, but like uh, one of the things that I think that comes with liberal values, right, is sort of humility about like what is right, like what is the good life. Liberals try to steer away from defining the good life, instead viewing the good life as something which emerges from bottoms up community and individual or I would insist intersubjective experiences among people who are um, are sort of given the freedom to explore um, different ways of being, as opposed to being sort of like, not to put too fine a point on it, but told what to do in society, to be told what their lot in life is, to be told what their role is. So, I mean, this is sort of like the kind of the core ethical idea of what I think like liberalism is. And so when I say I'm a philosophical liberal, I'm talking about this stuff. I'm not talking about, you know, what mainstream political commentators talk about. And it's involved in a very frustrating set of uh, definitions that like people or versions of definitions that people have in their head, like to someone like me, because a lot of people use liberal and socialist as like interchangeable, both on the left and the right, which makes no sense. Like socialism and liberalism are in fact like not. You can argue that they're both like ideologies of the left, right? In a sense, but they're in opposition to each other. They're not compatible ideologies, right? And if you get, eventually, like, I mean, if you have just liberals and socialists and no conservatives, liberals and socialists will fight each other, right? I mean, this has happened in the world. It's not the same ideology at all, and it is a sort of a weird you know piece of like historical happenstance that like the Democratic Party does. I mean, we can argue like how socialist I think that like various actors like say Bernie Sanders and say like AOC and some of these like more left wing members like actually are, at least in a once again in a sort and in a sort of philosophical sense. Um, and I'm not, I'm not a socialist. I mean, I think that socialism is a failed ideology. And I think that the 20th century proved that. Um, then people will then sort of like throw their hands up and say, well, look at Scandinavia. Well, I don't consider Scandinavia to be socialist. I don't think any part of Europe is socialist. I think Europe is largely a liberal democratic continent, including Sweden and Finland. Um, and I know that people will sort of like debate this. They'll still point out that like, well, Sweden has like, Like, I mean, what is it, like something insane, like 41% of their like GDP tied up in transfer payments, and people will say that's socialist. I mean, well, I mean, really, is it? And I don't think so. How is taxing the rich and giving it to the poor socialist? Socialists don't believe in property to begin with. They don't believe that capital should be accumulated by private actors. So they don't believe it should be redistributed. They don't believe it should be they don't believe in capital accumulation at all. So I mean, the presence of a welfare state is by definition not socialist in the strict sense. I mean, Marx and Engels would not recognize Finland and Sweden or Norway as socialist states. They would see them as they would see them as um, democratic capitalist states with, like, I mean, I don't know what Marx would make of it. Like, if he would be impressed that Sweden has a capitalist economy and that it taxes it and then it uses that to like pay for, cradle to grave welfare. But like, that's like, it's still technically like liberal because, Swedes, can start businesses and they can own capital and they can own property and they can buy and sell it. But they have to pay a lot of taxes and the government provides a lot of programs, but that's not socialism. Wealth redistribution is not socialism. Um, call it what you will, but like, all systems have had some degree of wealth redistribution, whether it's like, you know, tariffs or taxes to pay, for the military, poll taxes, whatever it is. That's like not the distinction. It is kind of weird that in the American political discourse that like wealth distribution is like seen as like a sign of socialism, but like it's weird. I mean, like, so a true socialist economy would not have wealth redistribution because there's no wealth. Everyone is the same wealth by definition, and people are just given what they need, right? Given Marx's like famous like line. So yeah, I mean, I don't use the word socialist like philosophically, like the way that most Americans do. I think when a lot of Americans say socialist, they think that means they believe in Medicare for all and higher corporate taxes. But that's not real. I mean, that's not really like socialism. You can call it, I know people will call it like democratic socialism or third way socialism, but it's like it's really kind of like bullshit, really, I think. Anyways, I mean, it's really just like it's really just like a regulated market economy, right? With a state that provisions for the public good in the form of like a welfare state. And that's like, in principle, that's like not offensive, to philosophical liberalism. It's like it's fine. You can be a liberal and support those things. Um, so, but that, and actually you get liberals who disagree on these things, right? There are liberals that think that we should regulate corporations a lot more. And there's some liberals who tend to be more, let the market do its thing. And liberals disagree on this, right? Like whether you like it or not, Milton Friedman was a liberal. But he was also like very like pro market. But he was a liberal. He was a liberal. Like, I mean, philosophically, he didn't say anything that was incompatible with philosophical liberalism. Um, and sort of the whole sort of, I mean, this is obviously like a conversation within liberalism, right? That there was a sort of a faction within liberalism, like you can call it market liberalism, you can call it neoliberalism. I know that like I'll mention Vlad Vexler again. He calls sort of the what we're currently seeing in this like Trump administration hyper neoliberalism. You can call it these things, but it's there's like disagreements within liberalism. There's liberals that think that we should we should engage in more antitrust action. We should break up big companies and focus on competition. There's liberals that think that we should take a hands-off approach. So it does need to be understood that like being a liberal does not necessarily like place you in those policy issues. You can be a liberal, like, you can be a liberal and support universal health care, and you can be a liberal and think that like everyone should get private health insurance. And like you can have two liberals in that situation, and both liberals can think the other person's a horrible person for their own attendant ethical reasons on that issue. So, anyways, that's like I want to like just like be very like clear about that. So I'm a liberal. Um, in that bent. So when it comes to sort of this conversation around like identity politics and this piece, I love how I like tell you what I'm going to talk. I do this like every time too. I tell you what I'm going to talk about, and then I take so many. I go down so many rat holes before I get to like what I was going to say. But I'm trying to just like establish like terms here. Um, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, if I'm being honest, and I should always be honest. Like, why would I lie to you? It's actually a terrible thing that we always say that. It's like this is a horrible thing, most like horrible rhetoric. Um, Force of habit. I mean, I do think. I mean, I do think that like sort of the sort of critical theory, right, is something that I find it like kind of epistemically incoherent personally. I've never really been comfortable with like sort of like with critical theory, which I mean, I view as sort of a attempt to create a formalism, right? Like a generalized formalism on this on sort of power imbalances in groups, which is really kind of inspired by Marxist class analysis. Um, and I have issues with that as well. And like I like not that like Marx was like necessarily like completely wrong in his observations. I think like I mean I think there's like a lot of truths in Marx's critique of capitalism. But I think liberals have accepted those critiques and have chosen to address those critiques with things like regulation, like with the welfare state, with antitrust laws. Basically like the FDR's New Deal was basically like the liberal answer to Marx's critique, if you could put it that way. And so one could get confused and say that that was actually Marxism, but it wasn't. No, it was basically saying like, look, Marx, you're right. Like capitalism has these failings, but we don't need Marxism. We can have liberalism, and we can create like the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FTC. We can create all these regulators, and we can basically regulate capitalism and try to like limit its excesses. And that was sort of the liberal answer to the Marxist critique. I think that's like the correct way to view it. Like if you're sort of like being really really careful about these things like philosophically. So I mean, like the truth is that like there I would agree with Yasha Munk as just a matter of like intellectual honesty that hyper identity politics does have a sort of an ideological heritage that goes back to Marx and his class analysis. And that what we see in sort of like this sort of the academic conversation around critical theory and like these conversations around intersectionality are actually just a kind of an attempt to sort of like generalize that across like other domains with other categories. And I'm not a fan of this kind of thinking like at all, right? And I always want to be careful too, because like I mean it is like I don't want to like play into the hands of like like bigots and racists and stuff, because like I hope people can see that I don't really have much tolerance for bigotry or prejudice. Um, I think my public writing speaks for itself on that. But at the same time, like I don't like agree with like the far left, right, on about what we should do about these things. And never really have. I have like serious critiques of the far left. I think that it's not that like so like when I criticize identity politics, I'm not criticizing the idea that that there's racism or homophobia or that trans people experience discrimination. I don't like I've written very empathetically, I think, on all of these issues, and will continue to do so. My general issue with identity politics is that I think that it leads to sort of illiberal prescriptions for solving these problems. Like I don't think that I don't think that universities should deplatform heterodox views. I don't think they should do that. I think that that's a mistake. Um, I think that like look, I'm more than happy to go and debate the fucking racists and fascists. I'll fucking do it, right? I don't like I mean like if need be. I mean, it seems to me that like they there's like you get like there's actual Nazis with hundreds of thousands of followers right now on X, like, and like we can't like deplatform them, right? This deplatforming as a strategy did not work, guys. I hope everyone notices this. I never thought it would work. In fact, I've been a long time critic of deplatforming and cancel culture. Because actually not for the reason that like people think. Like I understand like the reason for like why people want to deplatform these people and why they want to cancel them. Like I get it, right? I mean, social ostracization is like, it's a thing. You can do it. You can exclude people from polite society if they act like assholes and if they're hateful. My general issue with it has actually been for something that most people do, I feel like don't think about. It actually comes down to people like me or like anti-racist activists or anyone who's sort of like trying to like confront prejudice in society. I feel like it's it's actually doing something that most people don't notice. It's causing us to lose the capacity to engage in in strong rhetorical and intellectual defense of like core liberal ideas, ideas of plurality, ideas of diversity, inclusion, tolerance. I think these are I defend these ideas, and I was defending these ideas in my discussion with Mr. Curtis Yarvin on Monday night in our 40-minute discussion. And I'll debate these issues with him on stage, if we have a public debate. But they do need to be defended. This idea, I find it quite frustrating, actually, um, as somebody who's like actually like out there, like debating these racists. When I hear from people on the far left saying like, "Well, don't give that person a platform; just cancel them. If you debate them, you legitimize them." Like, I don't know what that's supposed to mean, right? Like, we have like 30-40% of our country paying attention to these fascists on platforms they control. So I like is the fear that if like someone like me like debates like one of these people that like what's actually going to happen is that like more people are going to become racists or are we or because I'm like confident that I can like beat these people in a debate, right? I'm confident in my rhetorical skills. Like I think their ideas are stupid. They're obviously stupid. They're intuitively stupid arguments. And I think the left has disarmed itself of the ability to engage in persuasive rhetoric. It's substituted persuasion and argument with canceling and deplatforming. And so like you see this, like the left doesn't know how to fucking argue. It's insane. Like you go back and like, go back and like watch sort of like, debates like left versus right debates like in the past, like you can go on YouTube and find videos of like Christopher Hitchens and like people like debating and stuff, and it was like a completely different time. Like people knew how to fucking argue, and now like nobody on the left knows how to argue. All they know how to do is like think about like how to deplatform the people that they think have dangerous ideas. And I'm not sure like why anyone thinks this has helped us. It's left us completely disarmed in this moment. Um, the fascists are in control of our federal government. And people need to be persuaded that these ideas are bad. So I find I find the sort of these critical theorists and sort of their conclusions around like how to navigate the the political landscape to be quite frustrating and actually self-defeating for the reason I just explained, right? I mean, I know that, like, I mean, I would also share in the notion that um that not allowing a debate between, like, say, like a fascist and a socialist, or a fascist and a liberal on say the Harvard campus, I think that's crazy. I think universities should allow crazy ideas to be debated, and I think that, like, does anyone actually think that a fascist is going to win a debate against, like, like a actual, like, trained, like, philosopher or someone like myself on the campus of Harvard? Like, why not just let the debate happen? Like, just embarrass them, like, show the world, like, how stupid their views are. I don't know why the left is so afraid of this. Like, we didn't like, the civil rights movement didn't, like, win by deplatforming racists. It's not what Martin Luther King did. He didn't have that power. So I think that yeah, I mean, I won't apologize for the fact that, like, yeah, I don't have, like, terribly warm feelings for identity politics. Uh Not because, like, I have any sympathy for racists. Like, I clearly don't. I mean, you guys have seen the things I've written. I just think that the idea that, uh that these ideas can't be confronted intellectually and rhetorically, and that only bad will come of that, is, I think, it's a crazy idea. Well, I mean, we tried that. I mean, the left disarmed itself over the last 10 years, and relied on deplatforming, and they didn't win. Trump's president now. JD Vance is vice president. Like, I mean, like, what? Like, I mean, Pete Hegseth is head of the Pentagon. They're kicking trans people out, right? I mean, like, I mean, like, I'm not sure, like, what people think this sort of strategy got us. Um, I thought it was a bad strategy. I always said it was a bad strategy. Said it was going to blow up in our face. And anyways, I feel kind of vindicated about that in this moment. And yet here I am, like, I'm, like, obviously going to, support human dignity, and I'm more than happy to go on stage and put a Nazi in their place. We tens of millions of people died to put that son of a bitch down, and was finally killed in, he took a cyanide pill in his bunker in 1945, but we took the fucker down. And I just, I'm not afraid of, like, facing these people down. I think that the fact that, it just seems like very few people in my position even know how to have an argument is quite shocking, and I think is, like, a serious problem, and a problematic feature of our epistemic moment, that, like, nobody knows how to debate and persuade anymore on the left. So anyways, Yasha Monk. Yeah. So, like, there's this, like, I mean, I actually think that this identity politics thing is kind of, like, over, like, really, like, as like a cultural artifact, and I don't think it's coming back, like, anytime soon. Um, Mainly because, like, I think that, like, honestly, like, I mean, I have friends, like, I have, like, philosopher friends at, like, Georgetown and Reed College and Harvard, and and NYU, and, like, I mean, and and the truth is that, like, even leftist, like, Noam Chomsky even has criticized, like, the wokest shit on campus, right? Like, even left wing academics have as well, right? At least as it pertains to sort of, like speech codes and stuff like that. He's been completely against that, to Chomsky's credit, and he is a socialist. I am not. We disagree, but we agree on this. Um, I just think that, like, you got to let bad ideas get get challenged, and we have to do the hard work of challenging them, and we're just simply being reminded the lesson of history, which is that, well, when you forget history and you take it for granted, it comes back and haunts you, as it is, like, happening, like, right now. But this fear, though, that you kind of get on the right, and the center right, that is sort of the woke. Gollum has sort of like just gone into hiding and is now engaging in some like really complex Machiavellian game to sort of like come back in a big way. I just think, which is kind of like what Yasha Monk is like talking about in his piece. I should like tell you which piece it actually is. I had it up and now I don't. Where did I put it? Where did I put Yasha's piece? Um, but anyways, he was saying in his piece basically that he sort of he sort of thinks this sort of recession of um identitarian ideas, sort of Frankfurt School sort of ideas among leftist thought is really just gone underground, and it's like sort of engaged in some sort of like Machiavellian sort of like behind the scenes like posturing. I just don't think that's true. Um, I think this like I do think that like one of the things that I think has sort of happened with a lot of these figures that are really obsessed with this like what they view as this progressive excess that they call woke, um have sort of like become sort of like captured by like their own sort of like narrative and their audiences, quite frankly, that there's like, so they kind of have like, I don't know, what's like the word to use, but like it's like, it's not like, I wouldn't call it like trauma like per se, but like they've sort of like fallen in, I don't want to say they've fallen in love with the subject, but like they sort of, you have a lot of people, right, who sort of like made their whole sort of political identity like challenging this like thing that they call woke. And and Yasha's like obviously like one of them, right? Like, he's like one of these. I don't think that Yasha's like, I wouldn't accuse him of being on the right. Like he's like genuinely like afraid of these fascists. But he is like one of these like people in the center left who are just like still really obsessed with like checking this for perceived perception, what he identifies as progressive excess. And I think that that's like, I mean, I just like don't share that like fear at all. I think the cultural moment has passed. And I think that to the extent that you have like figures like Monk who are sort of saying like, yeah, like the woke golem will be back in a big way, in 2 or 4 years. I think just like totally misunderstands the nature of these social forces. I think it's in a recession. Um, I think it's like I do think that there's like a resurgence of like the academic freedom movement, on campus, including in the Ivy Leagues. That's like very real. And I think, I expect that like trend is like going to continue because I think that people are finally like, I mean, I think like these universities and the faculty in particular, like kind of like realize that things got a little bit out of hand. And I think like if you speak to even some like leftist academics when they're not afraid of like being called out, like they'll agree with that, right? Um, so I mean, I think this like woke boogeyman now is like mostly bullshit, I guess is what I'm saying. So like to the extent that you have like these like center left figures that are like going out of their way to prove that they're not woke. I mean, I think they're wasting their fucking time. I just like I mean, I guess like a really like succinct way of saying that is like I really think that it's like over, guys. Like the whole woke thing's over. It's over. Like we've moved on, like culturally. And like and I think that like less and less of the general public is going to care about it. And like these people are just like literally like chasing a ghost. They're chasing a ghost. Um, I think that I mean, I think that the one asterisk I like put on that is like I think that the trans like issue is going to fester. I think there's going to be like some political battles in that in the future. Uh, but I mean, I generally, I'm actually kind of just generally like optimistic actually about the trans thing. Um, I actually don't think most Americans like are like I actually think there's going to be like probably like a backlash in the next few years against the anti-trans backlash of the right. I think there's going to be like a kind of a that's is my like prediction, like looking at the social and cultural forces, because I think most Americans are decent people, and I think just as like how most Americans sort of just like realize that like people same-sex couples getting married didn't end the world. I think people are gonna eventually realize that like like trans people like using the bathroom of like the gender that they present with is like not that offensive either, and hasn't been offensive like for most of Americans until like these right-wing demagogues made like a big deal of it. So I'm like, in the short term, like I get it, like there's like real like shit going on, like trans people are being kicked out of the military, like these are like brave Americans who've like chosen to fight for their country and to potentially give their life for their country if necessary. So I think like that is like just like insane. And I do think that like like we should be like shouting from the rooftops about the fact that that's an injustice. But I'm like cautiously optimistic that like culturally, right, like the trend among Americans generally is towards like tolerance and acceptance. And I would be surprised if I'm proven wrong about that in the coming years. But I mean, in the meantime, right, we have a regime that's like hostile, right, to these people, and we shouldn't minimize that either. And they're trying to coup the government and take it over. And this is a very serious situation. But I guess like just to really just like capstone it, it's like I think it's like completely a waste of time politically for like anybody like liberals to be just like obsessed with this woke thing now. Just forget about it, just like move forward. Let's just like build policies like don't like the fact is that like the fact that like the people on the left like kind of like have this like need to like prove that they're like not woke, and they're making a big deal about it. Like the thing that you really need to understand about this is like, I mean, not even that it's just a distraction, but that they're playing the political game on the reactionaries' terms. This is what the reactionaries want to talk about. Don't talk about what they want to talk about. Talk about what you want to talk about. It's just like it's stupid and like self-defeating. Um, so yeah, I have I guess a frustratingly nuanced view for some people. I agree that there was excess there. I agree that um, some of it needed to be tempered and is being tempered. I disagree with the right. There's a giant woke conspiracy that's gonna like come roaring back. And I think it's insane that people on the center left are going out of their way to like prove that they're not woke. I think all these things are just like, I think all those things are true at the same time. So my message to everybody is that like, yeah, we should just like move on from this issue and like focus on more important things. Like the fact that like, in the here and now, like we should be standing up for like the fact that like honorable trans members of our military are being dishonored. We should support them, and the Democrats shouldn't fear supporting them because they fear being accused of being woke. These are brave Americans who went through training, and they and like we've spent a lot of taxpayer money on some of them. Like I think one of these is like like some of these are like pretty senior members of the military, actually, like apparently. So I mean, they have competence, institutional knowledge. Like that's an outrage. And we should stand up for that. So that's like the other side of this like anti-woke thing is Democrats are tepid about that. Like why, right? Like I mean, like you can be against like the excesses of like woke on campus and deplatforming and cancel culture and all that stuff, and also still understand that like when actual transphobia is happening, you should do something about that. These things are not incompatible. Reason like logic. Um, and so I that this is like my view on it, which is like, oh, my I think, I mean, I don't even think it's like a centrist view. I just think it's like an observation of like what is real, right? Just an observation of like the social realities, as well as sort of like just a strong ethical stance, and apply that ethical stance against those realities as I see them, and that's my view. Anyways, that was what I wanted to say today. I wanted to put it out there. What are my views on the woke phenomenon? Well, now you know. Um, yeah, I think I think that was a nice way. I debated like writing this one, writing this one out, and I just figured I'll just like say it. I have other things to write about because, like I said, I don't want to waste time on the woke thing. I really think it's a waste of time. So, um, I figured I'd do a Substack live about it instead. So that's my view for what it's worth. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.